jump on in. Can everybody see my screen right now? Should say combining self-love and goal setting, just the title slide. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to do my best to kind of keep an eye on the chat and also be presenting as well. But certainly if anybody has any questions, like I said, feel free to type those up in the chat. But if it's been a minute and I'm not replying to it and you feel like it's relevant to the slide that we're covering, feel free to jump in and stop me as well. Okay, so just to kind of start out, my name is Alexis. I am a licensed clinical social worker here at Ed Counseling. And I'm really excited to start off the new year with a presentation focused on setting goals, right? I think with the new year, obviously that's something that everybody can get pretty excited about. And I'm sure that's something that you guys are kind of already seeing, maybe on your social media feeds or hearing about in the office or over Zoom, however you guys are, working right now. So I'm really excited to kind of jump into this topic, and we'll go ahead and just jump right in. So first and foremost, I think it's really important to start off with a shared definition of some of these concepts that we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about self-care, or I'm sorry, self-compassion. We're going to talk about values. And so I want to make sure that we're kind of working off of a shared definition of those things and kind of what that can look like. So obviously this won't be like an exhaustive focus on self-compassion, but I did just want to kind of jump in and share some tips that can be helpful for cultivating your practice of self-compassion. I think this is something that can be really challenging, especially in the day and age today. And so it's really important to, make sure that no matter what we're doing, especially when we're confronted with goal setting and potential setbacks or barriers to reaching goals, it's also really important to have compassion for ourselves. So some strategies for kind of jumping into compassion work, right? So first and foremost, we really want to focus on being mindful, right? And so what does that mean? That means to be in the here and now, right? My mind's not taking me to anxiety about the future. It's not taking me to things about the past, right? I'm not ruminating, I'm connected. I feel like I can, be here with the people that I'm around in my environment, be fully present and connected. And so mindfulness can be broken down into a couple different strategies. So first and foremost, I think it's really important to just observe, right? In our fast-paced society, it could be really hard to just stop and take a second and check in with ourselves, right? And so one of the first kind of components to cultivating mindfulness and eventually self-compassion is observing our experience. And so that might be, hey, what are my thoughts right now? What emotions am I tackling? What am I noticing in my body, right? I think a lot of times it can be very easy to go to, well, I'm thinking this and I'm feeling this, right? But sometimes we forget to think like, well, what is my body telling me, right? And so something that can be important is kind of framing like, okay, what do I want to observe? Well, I want to observe what's going on internally inside me. What are my thoughts? What are my emotions? What is my body trying to communicate to me? And also my environment, right? What's going on in my environment that I might be, interacting with, right? And how might that be impacting my internal experience? Next, we want to just acknowledge, right? Acknowledging what's there. Part of that observation practice can sometimes come with some judgment, right? Like, ooh, if I'm noticing like maybe I'm feeling anxious, right? Well, I don't like that, right? But before we get to that point of saying, well, I don't like that feeling, right? And deciding what to do with it, I think most importantly, it's just acknowledging like, I'm feeling some anxiety, right? And it may be a positive emotion. And so certainly there may be less resistance, right? If what we're noticing is like, oh, I feel calm, right? I think naturally we may not push back against that, right? But certainly when we're experiencing those more difficult emotions, sadness, loneliness, anxiety, stress, right? Those things can kind of come with that like second wave of judgment or criticism. And so something to kind of take note of is just label it. We don't have to assign meaning to it just yet. Certainly our brains and our bodies may want to do that, But we can always kind of stop that process when we notice it's happening and just say, what are the facts? Well, the facts are that I'm noticing I maybe feel anxious. What is my body telling me? Well, when I feel anxious, I know that my heart rate increases. Maybe I feel a little sweaty. Maybe I start to feel a little scatterbrained. And those are just things that I can notice without necessarily assigning criticism or judgment or any deeper meaning to that just yet. And so the next step then is to, okay, I've observed, I've acknowledged what's there. The harder part sometimes can be accepting it, right? And so again, kind of noticing like there may be some resistance, there may be some kind of judgment around like, well, I shouldn't feel this way, or maybe I should feel another way, right? But we don't necessarily have to take it that far. We can always say, hey, I'm noticing something's going on. I'm going to try to name it and label it, acknowledge what's there, right? And then just accept, like, this is where I'm at right now. One way to kind of help cultivate that is to practice curiosity, right? And so, as I've kind of mentioned, it's very easy for self criticism or self judgment to sneak in. And so, a way to soften some of that might be approaching with curiosity. And so, oftentimes when we experience emotions that are difficult, it can be almost automatic then to start judging ourselves for having these emotions or questioning like, what's going on? What's wrong with me? Why am I feeling this way? Right. And to some degree, right, that curiosity is needed. But we can also soften that in some ways to say, I wonder, what is this emotion, or what is this sensation, or what is this thought trying to tell me? Where did it come from? And again, just kind of practicing like labeling what does come up, and taking it a step further to even try to validate ourselves or to nurture ourselves in that moment, right? And so to kind of build off that example, if I'm feeling anxious, right, maybe I can kind of check in with myself and say, well, is there anything that maybe caused me to experience that anxiety? Was that something inside me? Was that something external? What was going on there, right? And then if I say, okay, like maybe it happened from something external, maybe for example, I've got a lot on my plate at work right now, and I've got some big deadlines coming up, right? And so to validate that, right, we could say, well, I can understand why I feel anxious because I've got a lot on my plate right now, and anyone in this position would probably feel anxious, right? That's a natural response to having a lot going on. And so that's potentially how we can kind of practice like validating that experience, and then also kind of cultivating some nurturance by, potentially even saying like, what do I need in this moment? Right. And so, how can I, yes, validate, but then also offer myself some support? What do I feel like I need in this moment? Well, when I'm feeling anxious, right, maybe what I need is to step away for 15 minutes, focus on my breathing, focus on grounding myself in my environment, what's going on around me, to kind of further listen to and honor these kind of messages, right, that our sensations or our thoughts or our emotions themselves might be trying to tell us. And then let me check the chat box really quick just to see if anybody has any questions so far. Sorry, give me just a second. Okay, let's see. Okay, perfect. Everything looks good. So before we continue, does anybody have any questions, any comments? I think some of these strategies, they can be difficult. They may not necessarily come naturally, right? But any thoughts on any of that so far before we jump back in? Okay. Okay, so some additional kind of more concrete tips, right? So some strategies for cultivating self-compassion. could be, for example, affirmations, right? So affirmations are just kind of positive statements that we can utilize to help us to stay motivated, to help kind of um, difficult times, negative emotions. So an example of a mantra might sound like, safe, I'm secure, I can handle difficult moments, I can handle difficult emotions, right? And so just kind of that extra vote of confidence, right? In those moments where maybe we're struggling or we're not necessarily able to immediately identify with our capacity to handle something. One strategy to cultivate self-compassion. Additionally, meditation. So, for example, loving kindness meditation can be helpful for cultivating self-compassion. And what that kind of looks like is basically, how can I send compassion to myself, to people that I care about, to people maybe that I don't like, to people that I don't know. And so ways that we can mentally practice giving compassion to others, right, can be helpful for allowing us to access that for ourselves. A lot of times, when I work with clients, they tell me, have compassion for other people. It's when I try to have compassion for me, right, that I start to struggle. And so utilizing something like loving kindness as a meditative practice can be helpful because it kind of helps us practice a little bit. How do we play around with our compassion? First, it can be really easy to access compassion that we have for people that we care about, our loved ones, right? It might be a little bit more of a challenge to access compassion for people that we maybe don't know or even people that we don't like, right? But by kind of practicing that flexibility, right, it allows us then to also come in and practice providing that for ourselves. Some additional strategies, hand over heart. So this can be helpful for just kind of providing like a tactile anchor to. There's a willing hands. And it pretty much just means like when you're noticing resistance in yourself or that openness within our nervous system. This openness in general. And then finally, strategies again for practice might be journaling, right? So kind of working through what are those things that I'm noticing when I'm observing? What can I acknowledge? What can I accept? What maybe gets in the way of that acceptance? So in general, these are just kind of strategies, tips for cultivating self-compassion, which ultimately will allow us to meet ourselves with compassion in those moments when maybe we're struggling to really maintain or fully meet the goals that we've set out. So a fun little kind of self-compassion exercise is this really cool test that was put together by Dr. Kristen Neff. She does a lot of work pertaining to self-compassion. And I really like this test because number one, it's free. So nothing wrong with a good free resource. It's pretty quick. It's only 26 questions, and they're basically all designed on a 1 to 5 Likert scale. So based on, this experience, where do you feel like you fall? Strongly disagree. This doesn't describe me, doesn't fit with me, to strongly agree. This sounds exactly like me. So in general, it can give you a average, like a score to kind of help you figure out like, where is my compassion level? In general, scores are typically an average about a 3, but they range from like a 3 to a 5, or I'm sorry, a 1 to a 5. So that might be a strategy for kind of checking in with yourself. Where am I in my level of self-compassion? And how can I start to cultivate and lean into that practice, which ultimately can be helpful for helping you to reach your goals. So let's also talk about values. So in general, values are simply, just like it says, just our standards, our principles of guiding our behavior. It can be a really helpful judgment for what we determine is most important in our lives. And so essentially, when we talk about values, we're talking about what is important to us in our heart, in our mind, in our soul. What is it that, helps us feel connected, helps us feel alive, helps us feel like we are living in a way that makes an impact and is meaningful. And so some general questions to consider when you're starting to explore and identify your values might be, what really matters to me, right? What do I want to do with the time that I have on this planet? What kind of person do I want to be? How do I want people to perceive me? How do I want to be remembered? What strengths do I bring to the table? What qualities do I want to develop and cultivate to live a more authentic life? And also considering how you want your values to really show up in your life. And so certainly values are going to shift based on where we're at and the context of what we're doing, right? And so how do our values shift, and how do we want them to show up in our place of work, our career, our education? How about in our personal lives, our relationships, our families, our friends, our romantic relationships? How do we want this to show up in our health-related goals or our goals related to personal growth? And finally, of course, leisure, right? How do we want our values to show up in those times of leisure and fun and adventure? And what do we want those things to look like? And I think something that's important to note here is that our values are going to shift depending on what domain we're looking at. And some values may show up in one domain and not another one, versus other values may show up in all of the domains, because depending on the values that you have, they may have a place in every domain in your life. So I'm going to switch over to some strategies for exploration, but because the PowerPoint is a little hard to see, I'm going to switch over to the actual document itself. So we will be starting off with the value bullseye. And so again, utilizing these types of questions that I discussed, something like this worksheet can be helpful to identify, within these domains, work, relationships, personal growth, leisure, where am I currently living my values? So when we look at the bullseye here in the middle, right, that means we're living a life that's fully in line with our values, versus on the outskirts, right, maybe we're living a life that's more inconsistent with our values. And so it's important to kind of reflect, once we identify our values, how in line do we feel like these are with these different domains in our life? And so in some places we may be doing better than others, right? Maybe my values to personal health or personal growth and health, right, are more aligned than what I'm able to do in my work or in school, depending on, what context that is. And then next, in general, it could be helpful to kind of break down these domains even further, right? And so obviously within the context of family, right? If I'm a parent, my values are going to be different with my role with parenting, right, than they might be in my role as a spouse. And so, further breaking down these different types of domains in our life can kind of also help us to narrow down our values a little bit more. And so something like this can kind of allow us to say, okay, within these more nuanced, more detailed domains in my life, how do I want values to show up? Again, what we value in our community and in our environment may be totally different than what we're valuing in our personal growth or our leisure spaces. And so kind of breaking these things down and going into the details and kind of the nitty gritty of it all, right, allows us an opportunity to kind of figure out, where do these values fit? And so something that can also be helpful is identifying then how important these goals are. And so we can use things like ranking systems, 0 to 10 scales, right? To say, you know, right now I'm not living a life in this domain that is in line with these values, but how important is it to me that I start to do that? And naturally that can influence the kind of goals that we set. So since we're talking about values a lot, right, it's important to kind of start exploring what are our values. And so again, I'm going to just switch over to a format that will hopefully be a lot easier for you guys to look at. So this is a core values list that was adopted by W.R. Miller. And so really this looks at about 50 or so values. And I really like this one because in my values work, it's very easy to become overwhelmed with the amount of values, right? I mean, theoretically, there could be hundreds and hundreds of values. And so I like this one because I think it does a good job of giving a wide variety of values. There's about 50 or so on here, but not to the point where it's like so overwhelming that it's like, I don't even know where to start, right? And so what I typically recommend, looks like we've got a couple questions. Yes, let me maximize this just very quickly. Okay. So obviously this won't be something that we do right now, but I will make sure that these things are available to you guys. So essentially what I like to recommend is, you know, taking about 5 minutes maximum, running through the list and just checking very kind of quickly, not allowing yourself to overthink too much. What are values that stand out to me? So for example, right, just kind of skimming the list, examples of various boundaries are listed. Let me check the chat really quick. Okay, perfect. And so obviously there's quite a few, which is why I recommend trying to be kind of quick about it. Like, don't allow yourself to start like second guessing or like overthinking too much. Very quickly kind of saying like, is this something that I value? Yes or no? If it's a yes, I'm going to give it a check mark and then I'm going to move on, right? So obviously, like I said, it is kind of a lengthy list of values. Like I said, I think there's about 50 on here, but a good starting point is first identifying out of the 50, right, which ones maybe speak to you or which ones are values that you feel like are in line with either the life that you're currently living, or I think it's also helpful to also add like, hey, what are the values that maybe aren't showing up in my life right now, but that I want to show up to? And so I always let my clients know like, hey, just identify what is presently available and what you might want to also be available, even if that's not currently happening. And so from here, what I typically recommend is, okay, let's say a lot of times I'll have clients that come back and they're like, oh, I've got like 20 or 30 values off of this 50 value list, right? And so from then what we look at is how can we start grouping values by, you know, the overarching kind of theme. And so that can be one strategy to kind of help narrow down your list. But then also, like I mentioned before, the ranking system of how important is this value to me on a 0 to 10 scale. And so kind of recognizing like, all right, there are values that are going to stand out as most important, and there are going to be values that will eventually come to be maybe least important, right? And so values that are in that most important category are going to be the ones that we're going to prioritize. Typically, I recommend about 10. Once we get past 10, it can feel a little overwhelming sometimes. And so you want to try to get it down to 10, but it doesn't absolutely have to be 10. It can be as close to that as you can get it. And again, these are just going to be helpful to overarchingly inform what our goals are. A lot of times, if we're able to connect our values to our goals, we're going to have more buy-in, we're going to have more motivation, because if we want to live a life in line with our values, like most of us do, that's going to help really drive home the point of like why we're setting the goals that we're setting. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into goal setting. First and foremost, some general strategies for goal setting are going to be, we want to be able to break our goals down to very concrete, specific, time limited, and measurable goals, right? So if I have an overarching goal of I want to be a better friend, right? But I don't go into any more detail than that, I don't really know what that looks like, right? And so if I'm not defining that and getting into, you know, the concretes, the specifics of what that looks like, then I don't have a good foundation of setting a goal that I can actually come back and say, oh, okay, I made these, I took these steps, right, to reach this goal. And so we want to make sure, again, that we're specific, we're concrete, we're very clear, time limited in how we're setting our goals, but also to make sure that we give ourselves a point of measurement, right? Where I can look back and say, okay, I know that I needed to do this X amount of times. And so if I set that from the outset, then I can come back and say, well, did I do that? Yes or no? And that can be helpful for kind of measuring our progress. Additionally, we definitely want to reward ourselves for the progress that we do make. Sometimes it can feel like maybe we're making baby steps, right? But ultimately, those baby steps are going to lead to larger steps that will get us to our long-term goals. And so ways that we can do this are through positive reinforcement. And that can range from anything like positive self-talk. Hey, I'm really proud of myself today because I did XYZ and that's working towards my goal. Or to like an actual tangible reward, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with giving yourself a little treat every now and then when you're working towards something really hard. And then finally, we definitely want to record our progress. And so it can be helpful to try to keep track of things, or even like create our own kind of like, I think even like an Excel spreadsheet, right? Because then we can get like actual data, graphs, plot charts, right? To look and see, hey, what does my progress look like? And as long as we have made sure that those goals that we've set are measurable, we shouldn't have any problem monitoring our progress. So let's go into some more specifics around how do we set those time-limited specific goals. So what I like to recommend is a couple different strategies for breaking that down. So we want to include first and foremost, what is our value, right? That we're trying to connect to our goal. And then what is our overarching goal, right? And so I have an example that we'll go over, but for now, I'll kind of keep it general. So first and foremost, one of the most helpful things that we can do for ourselves is set an immediate goal. What is one thing that I can do in the next 24 hours that will ultimately help me take a step towards whatever my goal is? Next, we want to set short-term goals, right? So in the next few days to the next week, what is another step that I can take that will ultimately help me move closer to reaching my goal? Next, we can break it down even further to the medium-term goal, right? And so this might be, okay, in the next few weeks to next month, what do I want to have accomplished? What do I want to work on accomplishing? And then finally, and this is probably something that will be reflected in your kind of overarching goal, what is my long-term goal? In 6 months, in a year, in 2 years, what is the goal that I'm working towards? And so breaking them down into these smaller chunks can be helpful, not only in helping us figure out like, okay, what are the steps that I need to take in the long term to reach these overarching goals, but what are steps that I can actually take right now to start working towards my goal? So let's talk about how to combine everything together. So first and foremost with self-compassion, it is it's a skill, right? It's not something that we are immediately, it's not something we immediately know how to do, right? It's something that we have to learn to do. And it's something we have to cultivate and practice, and it takes consistency. And so a big piece of that is identifying, well, what works for me, right? For some people, that might be affirmations, it might be gratitudes, it might be journaling, it might be meditation. Ultimately, no coping skill is a one size fits all. And so there is some nuance and some obviously uniqueness to all of us, right? And so it's really important to figure out what works for me. And that may take some experimentation, that may take some trying out some goals that are trying out some skills that maybe don't feel like they work. And so some trial and error, some troubleshooting around some of that. But ultimately, we can all find a combination of strategies and skills that help us reach success. And so I think it's just about, being open and being willing to try new things, even if it means that that may not be the skill for us. Additionally, identifying your top 10 values. So examples of that might be friendship or wellness-based goals. Those are going to be examples that I'm going to circle back to here shortly. And then again, we want to set our actual goals, right? Based on these values that we've identified, what are the goals we want to work towards? And we want to make sure, again, that those are specific, time limited, realistic, measurable. And we want to make sure that we're kind of identifying goals to help track our progress along the way. What can I do immediately versus what is the overarching long-term goal that I'm working towards? So let's talk about an example. So let's say I've identified friendship as one of my top 10 values, okay? So a goal that I have that's based off that value of friendship is I want to improve my relationships with my friends. So I'd like to set a goal to enhance my current friendships and build deeper connections with those people. And so let's break that down a little bit to look at what does that look like in action utilizing some of these strategies. So something that can be helpful for kind of setting it up. I first and foremost, right, identifying the goal. So my goal here is I want to enhance my friendships and I want to build deeper connections with my friends. What value is connected to that? Well, obviously friendship, right? But we could kind of take that even broader and say maybe it's relationships, or maybe it's connection, right? Maybe I just want to feel connected to people. And so what are the action steps, right? What are things that I want to start doing, actual behaviors that I can utilize as a form of measuring my progress? And so examples of that might be, okay, I want to reach out to my friends consistently. I want to plan get-togethers. I want to plan getaways, and I want to celebrate their anniversaries and their birthdays. And I want to be there for them for those big life events, right? So we may want to take that a step further, right? And say, well, how can I break that down into even smaller steps? And so this is where we're going to get into like specific concrete, right? So I want to text, call, or video chat my friends 1 to 2 times a week. And so we want to make sure that that doesn't feel overwhelming, right? But what I can say is, yeah, I could shoot my friend a text once a week. That feels manageable. I could probably do that. And I'm getting quantitative numbers assigned to this, right? Which will ultimately help me track my progress in the later on, right? So I can look back and reflect and say, well, did I text, call, video chat my friends once a week? Yes. Okay. Well, then I'm making progress, right? No, I didn't. Okay, maybe I need to reevaluate that goal. Maybe that wasn't realistic for me. And so I think too, there's an element of like troubleshooting, right? We can set our goals with the best intentions, but we may have to come back and reevaluate, right? Because we can't predict what we're going to be going through or what life is going to throw at us. And so sometimes that means maybe we step back and reevaluate things that weren't realistic for us. But to continue kind of breaking that down, I want to initiate one get together or one getaway with my friends once a month. Again, that may be kind of a lofty goal. That may prove to be an unrealistic goal, but ultimately I'm going to throw something out there and I'm going to try to get it as quantitative, right, as specific and measurable as I can. And then next, I want to log birthdays and anniversaries in my calendar so that I don't forget these important dates. So obviously, we all live pretty busy lives, and so we may not remember all these things, right? But again, one step that I could break down to a smaller step is to say, well, maybe I just go through my calendar, right? Luckily, we have Facebook now that reminds us of everybody's birthdays, but I could go through my calendar, right? And just say, here are all these birthdays, so I remember these things. So let's start then with the smallest or the easiest step, right? So, okay, the smallest step here is I'm going to text 1 to 2 friends a week. And so I want to then be very specific, right? When do I want to start doing that? So let's say I set this goal up today. So tomorrow, Friday at 9 a.m., I'm going to text 1 friend and check in, see how their Friday's going. There's no necessarily rules around what I have to say, right? I mean, it could just be a simple text. Hey, I was thinking about you. How's your week going, right? But ultimately, that's something that we've specifically determined that I can do, and I have a timeline for when I want to try to get that done. So let's apply the greater content here. So again, reiterating my goal to enhance these existing friendships, to deepen my connections with the people that I'm friends with, right? So my immediate goal is, what are the friendships, right? I want to identify these friendships that I want to enhance. Who are the friends in my life that I maybe feel like I've fallen out of connection with, or I haven't talked to, right? People who I want to be texting, right? But maybe an immediate goal here is to figure out, who are those people? Who are those friends? And so then the short-term goal, right? What are we going to do in the next few days or so? Well, in the next few days to a week, I'm going to meet this goal of texting at least 1 friend a week, just to get some updates and see how they're doing. My medium-term goal, so again, weeks to months. Again, I want to initiate and try to coordinate some monthly get-togethers and or even some getaways. And so on a monthly basis, I'm going to try to coordinate what I can. And then generally the long-term goal, right? So within the next year, I plan to attend and or celebrate friends' birthdays, anniversaries, important events, make new memories, right, with these friends before the end of the year. And so these are all strategies that are specific, they're time limited, they're measurable. And throughout the time, right, I can kind of check back in with myself and say, hey, am I reaching these goals that I've set? So let's kind of continue with some examples. I know we went through the values pretty quickly, and I'm happy to pull that up if you guys feel like it would be helpful. But I'm wondering if there were values that maybe stuck out to somebody, or we could even potentially start with some goals instead and apply this formula maybe with an example that maybe somebody in the Zoom is working on. Anybody willing to share anything? Any goals that they might be trying to reach, or any values that they want to utilize as a form of goal setting? Okay. Let's see. I'm going to see if I can try to send this in the chat. Give me just a second, guys. Okay, so I went ahead and compressed all of the documents that I just presented, and I went ahead and sent that over in the chat. So let me know if you guys have any issues accessing that information, but hopefully that will make it a little easier to be able to see the values list. I know that the handouts, they're a little blurry, so I definitely understand. So let's work on another example while you guys are perusing those documents. And again, let me know if you have any issues accessing them. So let's look at a value like wellness. Okay. Obviously, I think that's one that most people are probably very familiar with in terms of goal setting around wellness and health goals, especially around the new year. So let's again apply the same formula here. So let's say that my overarching value that I'm wanting to address is wellness, right? So I really want to focus on my health, my wellness. I want to feel better, right, in those goals this year and how I can, grow in that area in my life. So let's say the goal is I want to build my strengths, right? So if my overarching goal is, okay, I want to build my strength, right? So let's look at immediate goals that I can utilize with this overarching goal of building strength. So let's say that, okay, I can, right now, I'd say I could probably do about 5 push-ups. So my immediate goal or my overarching goal is I want to build strength. And so a way that I want to build strength is to increase my endurance with doing push-ups, right? So I know right now 5 is about all I'm going to get. And so my immediate goal here is something that I can do in, the next 24 hours. Okay, well, what I can do in the next 24 hours is maybe I want to focus on upper body strength. And so I'm going to identify a workout plan, right? And so that plan, maybe let's say is I'm going to do 3 upper body exercises 3 times a week, and I'm going to apply that plan. And so my immediate goal is let's identify my workout plan. What do I want that to be? So, okay, let's say I want to pick 3 exercises to help build my upper body strength. So I'm going to do push-ups, I'm going to do bicep curls, and I'm going to do dips, right? So there we go, right? Immediate goal in the next 24 hours, I want to identify my workout plan. Okay, got that done. So in the short term, right, how do I want that to show up in the next few days to the next week? Well, I know the 3 exercises that I'm going to do. And so I want to allot myself 3 days a week that I'm going to do those exercises. So the short-term goal is in the next few days, in the next week, I'm going to shoot for 3 sittings, 3 exercises, right? 3 exercise sets out of the week. And so my medium-term goal then is, well, what do I want to try to accomplish in the next 3 to 4 weeks, the next month, right? So in the next month, I want to move up from 5 push-ups to 10 push-ups, utilizing 3 workouts a week. And so by the time that I have been doing this for theoretically 3 to 4 weeks consistently, I want to make sure that I moved up from being able to do 5 push-ups to being able to do a full 10 push-ups. And then generally, again, the long-term goal is that I want to build my strength. And so what does that look like for me? Well, ultimately, if I'm starting off in the very beginning, only being able to do 5 push-ups, maybe what I want to get to is I want to be able to do 50 push-ups with ease, right? And so over time, I may need to check in and kind of reevaluate my goals as I'm getting closer to those 50 push-ups, right? And, let's say I really come in gung-ho with this, right? And I stick to 3 times a week. I'm doing these 3 exercises, and I realized, hey, I can actually do 50 push-ups, and it didn't take me 6 months to a year to get there. So let me reevaluate my goal, right? How might I want to continue building this upper body strength, right? Any questions about that strategy, or does all of that make sense? Any questions about any of that? Any comments? Definitely. Okay. So let's look at um, just kind of general values. So obviously I know that it's 2 full pages, right? And we don't necessarily have, obviously, since you guys are just learning about this material, right? I can imagine you probably don't have your top 10 goals narrowed down just yet, right? But why doesn't somebody share a value that sticks out to them? Just feel free to type it in the chat, volunteer it, and then let's strategize some goal setting that we could do pertaining to any values that maybe really stick out to people. Okay, perfect. Service, yes. So service as a value, right? So, let's go back to, let's see, the core values list here. So, okay, again, another reason I really like this list is because it gives definitions. Obviously, we probably know what the definitions are, but I think it can be helpful to just kind of have that extra structure. So according to the core values list that we're working off of, service looks like to be helpful to others and to be of service to others, right? And so let's say potentially an overarching goal that we could connect to that is, I want to be of service to people in my community. And so to some degree, right, we could, go out and potentially survey people in the community and feel like, and kind of get an idea for like, oh, what do these people need, right? But we don't necessarily have to go that far, right? This can be very individual in terms of, I can provide service to my community in whatever way I maybe feel like works for me, right? And so we could say, okay, an overarching goal is that I want to be of service to my community. So let's say that the immediate goal, right, could be identifying what's something that I see is maybe lacking in my community, or what is something that I feel like my community needs that maybe we don't have, or something maybe we need more of, right? So for example, I am in the Montrose community. And so something that I notice with my community is that a lot of people will not pick up after their dogs. Okay. So to be of service to my community, a concrete way, right, an immediate goal that I can identify is, I know that every time I walk my dog, I pick up after them, I feel annoyed, right, when I see that other people didn't do that. And so my immediate goal is, I want to service my community by maybe helping out in that way. I'm already picking up my own dog's poop, right? Might as well help out the community and do something, for everyone, to better the environment and to increase the beauty, right, in the nature around me. So my immediate goal is, okay, I'm going to carry some extra waste bags so that I can assist in picking up additional waste in my community along my walk with my dog. So short term, in the next few weeks, right, or the next few days to weeks, maybe something else that I can do is, I know that this is an issue. And so every time I take my dog on a walk, I'm going to pick up, 1 or 2 extra pieces of waste that I see. But also maybe something else that I'd like to do is, there are these little like containers for like basically community waste bags, right? And so every time I walk by the community waste bag post, I'm going to just stick a little dog waste bag in there for other people in the community, right? And so kind of looking at these short-term goals, these are very measurable. They're very concrete, right? I know that I did it, right? Because I went on a walk with my dog and I maybe picked up one extra piece of waste, and I left the waste bag in the community waste container, right? And so the medium goal, right, might be something that I can do in the next few months, right? And so maybe something that I feel like I can do in the next few months is start posting on the Nextdoor app, figure out who my neighbors are, who are people in the neighborhood that have dogs, and how can maybe we as, dog owning members of the neighborhood, right, maybe collectively, collaboratively get together and figure out how can we solve this problem as a community, right? So maybe in the next few months, I want to craft a post on Nextdoor and try to start getting some more people, some more dog owners in the community to kind of help out with this effort. And then let's look at the long-term goal, right? So the long-term goal here is I want to not only be doing things individually in my own day-to-day to help out my community in this specific way, but I also want to be trying to engage with other people in my neighborhood, other dog owners, right, to see what we can do to try to tackle this issue together. And so maybe the long-term goal is I work towards creating like a network of people, a network of dog owners to kind of collectively like take on this neighborhood responsibility of, all right, we're all going to just pick up one extra piece of waste and we're all going to just contribute one dog waste bag, right, to the community storage, right? And so that might be a way that not only am I connecting to my individual responsibility within my community, but also getting other people connected and engaging other people and helping everyone to kind of feel empowered and to take accountability and to try to create a better environment, right, that ultimately services the whole community and makes the neighborhood more beautiful. Was that helpful? I kind of just like made that up as I went, but I hope it felt like concrete, made sense, measurable. What do you guys think? Okay, great, great. Okay, so we've got about 5 more minutes left. Any questions, concerns, anything that anybody is still kind of confused about or anything that I can help out with? We could do another example too. Okay, well, thank you guys all for coming and for your participation. And definitely in your goal setting journey, I highly recommend continuing to be compassionate with yourself and to be open to reevaluating your goals, right? Sometimes we set some pretty lofty goals, and it's okay to kind of check in and say, hey, maybe I, was shooting for the moon there, and maybe I need to shoot a little bit closer to home, and that's okay, right? It can be really helpful to, have that compassion for ourselves, but also continue exploring your values. I apologize. And kind of figuring out how do you want your values to show up in the way that you set goals, and how can you integrate self-compassion along the way so that you feel like, hey, if I need to troubleshoot, if I need to make some changes, we can always change and update these goals, right? But ultimately, what's most important is, am I taking the steps to reach this overarching long-term goal? And that may mean we need to reevaluate some short-term or some medium-term goal setting. But ultimately, if it helps us maintain consistency and reach these overarching goals, then it's definitely worth it to make those changes and to meet ourselves with compassion, because especially now, we can't always control what life throws at us, right? And so I think even now more than ever, it's important to be compassionate towards ourselves in the way that we set goals, because it may take some extra time. It may take some reevaluation. It may take some troubleshooting. It may take some experimenting, right? And ultimately, as long as that helps us to maintain and reach these long-term goals, it's definitely worth it to kind of be open and willing to reevaluate when we need to. Okay, well, thank you guys so much. And please feel free to email me or reach out if you guys have any questions about any of the documents. Please let myself or Marcus know if the documents don't work. And then don't forget to fill out the feedback survey. We love to hear your guys' feedback. And again, thank you guys so much for attending. And I hope that this was helpful and informative for everybody.